to another Live at 5. I am your host, curator Kevin Adkisson, and today I'm coming to you live from Academy Way from the Carl Millis House, which is right in the sort of center of Academy Way. So you can see down there is Lone Pine Road, and then the student dormitories on the left. Saarinen House is attached to Millis House. And then Millis's house is a 5,000 square foot, 5-bedroom, 5-bath house. And then on the other end is Carl Millis's studio. And then across the street is the faculty housing. Now, those of you who are dedicated Live at 5 viewers know that I toured Millis House last Wednesday on our Facebook Live at 5, and that was a hour-long tour of both the history of Carl Millis, the furniture, and we went through the whole house. Today I wanted to do a little bit more focused of a study, and so we're just going to do a closer look at 3 pieces of furniture inside of the house. Now, Eero Saarinen was the architect of Millis House, and Carl Millis arrived here in 1931. He lived in the house until 1951 when he and his wife Olga moved back to Sweden. And when Millis lived here, he was not here all the time. He was here just during the academic year, sometimes 6 months, sometimes just 1 month. But he did move a lot of his monumental Greek and Roman sculptures into the home. And so where the Millises actually lived was a little living room here at the top of the stairs. And so this is where the Millises would have hung out when they were here as a family. Downstairs, in the main living room of the house, was Millis's collection of Greek and Roman sculpture. Today, the house is the home of Susan Ewing and her husband Paul. Susan is the director of Cranbrook Academy of Art. And so Saarinen's house was actually built to be the president's residence. Eero Saarinen was elected the first president of Cranbrook Academy of Art in 1932. And the president did live in Saarinen House until 1990. That's when Saarinen House began being restored, and the decision was made to open Saarinen House as a museum and then have the director of the academy live here in Millis's house. It had been the sculptor in residence got to live here in Millis House. So unlike Saarinen House, Millis House is still used, it's still lived in, and it's also still a place where we can really showcase the Academy of Art. You'll notice the art on the wall, unlike at Saarinen House, which is restored to the 1931 appearance. The Millis House is kept filled with art from the current artist in residence. So a piece by Elliot Earls over my shoulder, pieces by Cooper, the one half of the print media air here, pieces by Scott Klinker in the corner, these foam pieces, a large piece by Iris Eichenberg there, and then a new beautiful piece, Cruel Optimism, Emerald City by Emmy Bright, the other half of the print media department. So if you want to learn more about the house and the sort of history of the home, I encourage you to go and look up my Facebook tour. But today I want to talk about 3 pieces of furniture. The Pedestal series of furniture from Eero Saarinen, manufactured by Florence Knoll. On this side of the room, we're going to talk about Knoll's seating furniture, designed by Florence herself. And then we'll start by talking about Harry Bertoia and his wireframe chairs. Now, Harry Bertoia is an Italian-born American artist. He immigrated from southern Italy to Detroit in the 1930s, and he came to Cranbrook in 1937 to study design at the Art Academy. He very quickly was promoted to head of the metal shop. The metal shop had been closed by the Great Depression in 1931, and Bertoia, who was a master silversmith from Italy, reopened the metal shop, and he stayed as an instructor and designer here at Cranbrook until 1943. Now, these pieces were manufactured in 1952, and they were manufactured by Knoll International. And Knoll, of course, I've talked about her many times at Live in 5, but in case there's any new viewers out there, Florence Knoll came to Cranbrook in 1932 as a young lady. Florence Schust, she went by Shu, and she was an orphan. She told her art instructor, Mrs. Raceman, I want to be an architect when I grow up. And she was introduced to Eero Saarinen. And the Saarinens practically adopted young Florence Knoll when they found out that she was an orphan. And she would spend her summers back at Vitrask, the Saarinen home in Helsinki. And then she would spend her school year at Kingswood as a boarding student. After she graduated from high school, she studied architecture in London at the Architectural Association, and then in Chicago with Mies van der Rohe. And then she came and she studied architecture with her father figure, Eero Saarinen, at the Academy. And it was when she was at the Academy in 1939 that she ran into Harry Bertoia. And she graduated, she finished her studies here at Cranbrook, and she went on to New York where she was an architect, and she fell in love with her furniture salesman, Hans Knoll. And Knoll at the time was a maker of very traditional furniture, revival pieces. So if you wanted a Chippendale dining room set, you could go to Knoll and they would be happy to make one. If you know the Edsel and Eleanor Ford house of 1927 or thereabouts, all of that furniture is Hans Knoll, and none of it looks like this. Florence was very interested in modern design, but she needed modern designers, and so she turned to her friends at Cranbrook to help do the designs. Harry Bertoia was not a furniture maker while he was here at Cranbrook, but of course he was surrounded by furniture makers. And so when Florence Knoll hired him to come and work for the company in New York, she sort of said, I don't need any specific product from you. I just need product to sell as part of this modern company. And so Harry Bertoia began experimenting with very thin steel rods. Those of you who know the whole sweep of Bertoia's career know his famous sound sculptures, which are simply these steel rods left straight and welded onto a ground plane, and they sway up in the air. He had a sort of lifetime interest in steel rods and sort of prefabricated pieces. But for these little chairs for Knoll, again from 1952, Bertoia took the rods and he tack welded them together. So they're so each individual joint is welded together. And they originally came as both the side chair version and then the armchair version, which is this really beautiful, quite comfortable swoop. Because this house isn't a museum, we actually can sit in these chairs. So hopefully one day you'll be at a reception or an opening at Cranbrook and find your way into one of these Bertoia chairs. But originally the chairs came in charcoal, in white, and in black. And when they were designing for the General Motors Technical Center, one of the ladies who was working in the design department under the legend Harley Earl, she suggested to Hans Knoll, can you send me an unfinished steel chair? Don't powder coat it with the black, white, or the gray. I just want a raw steel chair. But the raw steel chair didn't look very good, because if you know anything about welding steel, you know that every time these were welded, they would have this sort of off gas, and so it would have had that sort of rainbow sheen. The steel bars would have been all different colors because of the chemical and heat reaction. But Hans Knoll sent Jerry Cavanaugh, who was a graduate of Cranbrook, then working at General Motors, a raw steel chair. And Jerry Cavanaugh was a graduate of Cranbrook Academy of Art who was tasked at General Motors with both designing exhibitions, but also working with Eero Saarinen as he finished the campus out in Warren, Michigan. And so here is Miss Kavanaugh. And she took these raw, unpowder-coated steel chairs down to General Motors' chrome division. When you work for an auto industry giant, you have access to such things as car-sized vats of chromium. And so she electroplated or chrome-plated these chairs into the shiny chrome finish. And that, of course, becomes the sort of iconic finish that we most associate with these chairs. And it was done originally for General Motors at the sort of invention of Jerry Kavanaugh. And I do encourage you to check out this book, which was just recently published by the Princeton Architectural Press. It is the life work of Kavanaugh. Here she is sitting at Cranbrook Academy of Art. She's out by the Art Museum. There's Marshall Frederick's eels. But it has a little bit of her time at General Motors. This is my favorite of her displays. This is in the design dome of Eero Saarinen, and she filled it with these huge cages and then rented 100 canaries. One got out, but she was able to return the 99 rented canaries, and then all of the sort of plastic sheeting created these colorways around the room, and then you have the Oldsmobiles surrounding it. And so she was a sort of exhibit designer as well as the liaison between Eero Saarinen and General Motors. And she designed kitchens for Frigidaire. So check this book out if you want to learn more about a pretty impressive mid-century designer. She is still designing out in Los Angeles in her 90s, I believe. Now, the next piece of furniture that I want to look at are these black couches, which you probably have sat in one in your life if you've been around enough beautifully designed spaces. And these designs do not come from a Cranbrook, a male Cranbrook designer. These come from Knoll herself, from Florence. So what she would do, she did not design regularly. She was head of the Knoll planning unit, and there are lots of really amazing photographs of her, and she's sort of surrounded by all white men with suits and pipes, smoking, the sort of board of directors of the Seagram Company or General Electric, different huge mid-century companies, and she'll be the only woman in some fabulous power outfit. And she was in this male-dominated world of design and of business and architecture. And she would come across these planning problems. She thought of furniture not as decoration, not as sort of something separate from architecture. She thought of furniture as being part of the interior architecture. And so she designs architectural furniture. And these pieces come from 1954, so 2 years after the Bertoia chairs. And these are simply called the Florence Knoll sofa today. I'm not sure what they were called in 54. I don't think she named them after herself originally, but today you can still buy all of the furniture we're seeing. And this is now called the Florence Knoll sofa. And her inspiration for this piece, she was obviously influenced by her mentor at the Illinois Institute of Technology, the German-American modernist Mies van der Rohe. And it very much is a sort of more comfortable, more richly upholstered, also probably more adaptable version of Mies's Barcelona chair. It has the sort of similar lines and same grid of tufting. But she said that the inspiration for these pieces was that she needed pieces that weren't there. And so when, in the course of working in the Knoll planning unit, she found a problem that she couldn't solve with what was on the market, she designed it herself. Now, these pieces date to 2011, and these were generously provided by Knoll, which is still very much in business. We were just celebrating Knoll Design Days earlier this week with different online seminars. And Knoll provided both financial donation that was then supported by the Maxine and Stuart Frankel Foundation. So we're very grateful to all of the people who worked to donate this furniture for the director's residence, and to Linda Charfus, who was the designer who donated her time and as a board member of the Academy to help design the new space. It's in a very practical wool. I imagine it's very warm if you have to live with it, but since Michigan winters are where most of our activities are taking place, the durable wool makes a lot of sense. If anyone has any questions, do send them right along. The tables are also by Florence Knoll with chrome-plated legs and then the glass top. The last closer look item that I want to introduce or talk about, celebrate with you all, is the Pedestal Furniture. And this came onto the market in 1957. It was a pretty long gestation period for Eero Saarinen. He started working on them in 1954, and they were introduced to the press in January of 57, and they began delivery in 1958. He designed 3 different pieces originally. Knoll has adapted it from the side chair, the armchair, and the table into coffee tables. At one point, there was a pedestal ashtray. So today you can go online and you can see quite a family of pedestal furniture from Knoll. But what is the story of how this furniture was created? Well, when Eero Saarinen thought about furniture, he really designed it with this sort of intensity that he approached everything in his life with. He did all of the steps himself, unlike his architecture, where Eero Saarinen was designing with a team of people like Kevin Roach, Robert Venturi, Caesar Pelli, John Dinkeloo, all of the many people who came through the Eero Saarinen office. When it came to his furniture, Eero was actually usually working alone, and he would do all of the steps himself, at least first. So he would build the models, he would do the sketches, he would do studies, he would work with the plaster, he would use plaster and tissue paper and clay to make full-size models. He and Lily, his wife, would test out these models. It was a very hands-on process with the furniture. Now, other people were there to help him, but he really viewed the furniture as part of his career. It wasn't sort of a side gig. This isn't sort of the postmodernist, we'll design something for Alessi or Swin Powell and put our name on it. This was really a very serious focus for Eero Saarinen. And he had designed furniture as a teenager for Cranbrook. All of the furniture at Kingswood, over 35 pieces, are designed by the 19 and 20-year-old Eero Saarinen. He said that those pieces reflected him as being a child of his age because they are in historic styles, sort of Greek revivals, Swedish neoclassicism, as well as these sort of German modern tubular chairs. As he grew up, and after his father passed away in 1950, he became the first designer to really work with Florence and Hans Knoll. He also was, according to Florence, the most intense designer. He was slow, he was methodical, and he wanted everything to be perfect. And he thought of every single detail of his furniture. It's hard to imagine, in my own mind, putting Eero Saarinen in the place of someone like Bertoia, where the chair gets sent off and the client actually adapts it by chrome plating it. Eero did everything himself. He also thought of furniture as being quite different from his buildings. Whereas his buildings were really designed for the client, for the site, either one with the landscape or more likely responding to the very specific landscape and context. His furniture was meant to be more impersonal. He also said that his furniture needed to be classic. And I think when you look at these sort of space-age chairs, they are classics today, but I don't know if you would look at them and think, oh yes, you've designed something classical. But Eero actually used that term to say that he wanted his furniture to meet a sort of recurring need. He wanted them to be both practical but also visually delightful, and he wanted them to be for the everyman. That did not necessarily mean being affordable, but he meant it more as every house should be able to use this furniture and it should always work. Unlike his buildings that were so specific, never really repeating designs, his furniture was meant to never be just for one project. He never designed outside of the technical center. He did not design one-off pieces of furniture. That's not entirely true. He did a lot of one-off furniture, but when he was doing mass-produced furniture, he wanted it to have this sort of classic appeal and have no sort of individual statement. So when it came time to design this pedestal furniture, it was 1954. He was hot off of success with the Womb chair and with his Model 70 series, the sort of executive armchair and lounge, the Womb lounge chair. And he told his staff that we have 4-leg chairs, we have 3-leg chairs, and we have 2-leg chairs. We need a 1-leg chair. And so he also talked about looking at rooms and seeing a slum of legs, and that he found this sort of slum of legs to be very unrestful to the eyes. And he wanted a chair initially that would be in a structural total. And that's his own term. And he described chairs being from sort of King Tut's chair to all the way to Chippendale as being structural totals, where you have one material top to bottom. And the problem with that idea of structural total was that plastics had not advanced far enough. And so he never actually got a structural total. This is cast aluminum. There is then a bronze swivel that locks the chair together. And then you have the resin fiberglass chair body. Eero wanted it all one piece of cast plastic. However, that was not yet on the market realistically from a sort of technological engineering standpoint. But visually, I think that the Pedestal series, the Tulip series, absolutely meets the need of having this sort of structural total. Eero actually critiqued his old classmate and his best friend, Charles Eames, and his own early work as saying it was overly obsessed with the plastic and plywood of the seat, but ignored the legs. And so when he came to the Pedestal series, he, of course, was deeply rigorous about how the shell, the seat, was designed, but he didn't want it to be like he, at that point, viewed the chairs from the 30s and 40s, which was a very interesting modern shell and then sort of arbitrary legs below. He wanted to think of it from the floor all the way to the seat back. Now, Knoll was a little bit, and I think correctly, rightly worried about how long it might take for the Pedestal series to be completed and come to market. And so Hans Knoll sent a man, Don Pettit, here to Bloomfield Hills. He was a representative of Knoll, and he worked at the Eero Saarinen office to try and speed Eero up. I don't know if it actually worked. He remarked that Eero would say, "Let's talk about that next Sunday," and he never knew whether he meant the coming Sunday, Sunday 3 weeks from now, and he talked about sort of this inability to rush the process because he could not design anything without Eero. Everything came out of the master's mind. But a representative from Knoll was at the Bloomfield Hills office on Long Lake Road for 2 years while the series was developed, and Don later wrote that for Eero Saarinen, furniture really was form over function. That this sort of rightness of the design didn't come from any structural logic or engineering logic. It came from this sort of mystical rightness, is what Don said. And that's why he could never get the chair design out without Eero, because Eero was the one who was approving when something was correct. And it did come from this, quote, mystical rightness. If you know much about fiberglass furniture, if you look at sort of an Eames chair that's fiberglass, you'll see all the little squiggles, the fiberglass, the fibers of glass that are put into the plastic resin and that come to the surface. And Eero Saarinen hated that look. It's one of the reasons why the Womb chair is upholstered, so you didn't see the fiberglass shell. But here he's using a brand new and very expensive technology, which is called a fiberglass veil. And it's a much, much thinner fiberglass that's actually woven into a sort of screen-like material. And then the resin that is pumped into the injected mold piece of plastic, it's so thin with the fiberglass that the resin completely remains smooth and at the surface. So we can no longer see any of the fiberglass that is providing the structural reinforcement, and we're left entirely with the smooth resin, which is what Eero wanted. The other big change between a sort of Eames plastic shell chair and an Eero plastic shell chair are these ledges. And these ledges came from a production fact, which was that this was a single mold, a back piece of the mold, and then the front piece of the mold. And when they would take it apart, they would have a sharp edge here. And so Eero Saarinen wanted to eliminate that sharp edge because you could sand it down, but it became quite messy. And so he rolls it over, and so the release of the mold is right here instead of being right here. And so the rough edge, which is again still sanded, but you never see the rough edge. And it has the doubly nice feature that it then provides a handhold. One other neat feature that happened in the course of the design was that they noticed when people got up, so these are actually non-swiveling versions, but on the swiveling version, they noticed when people left a table full of pedestal chairs that they would all turn different directions. And if you're that concerned with how your room looks, you don't want to get up from dinner and see this sort of crazy circus going on. And so they invented a way of swiveling so that it would automatically right itself. And so when you got up from the table, you would turn out of the chair, and then it would snap back into place. Now, if you want to learn more about Eero Saarinen's furniture, this is the book that you need to get. It is a huge, beautiful book, and in it, I wanted to just show you a couple of photographs. This shows Eero Saarinen and Florence Knoll, about 1957. And notice he's actually pointing out the curved lip that I just showed you. And she is sitting in his Model 70, the office chair of about 5 years earlier. And then there is a whole chapter about creating the Pedestal collection, which just has some of Eero Saarinen's sketches from his archive at Yale. Earlier models, which had a hole in the back that proved to be structurally untenable. There's a stack of the shells there. And what's interesting is they were racing against Herman Miller to try and create a single pedestal collection. And Herman Miller was quite nervous because, of course, they were up against Eero Saarinen. And Knoll was quite nervous that if they weren't the first pedestal on the market, Herman Miller would win out. And so they actually launched the chair, and they hadn't figured out how to manufacture the bases yet. And so they just showed the plastic shell on plaster bases and wouldn't let anyone sit in them at the launch party. But it did successfully put a kibosh on Herman Miller's version of a pedestal chair. Here's Eero and his second wife, Aileen, and their son, Eames, at the house over on Vaughan Road. Of course, the Miller House in Columbus, Indiana. And then I just wanted to show one other image. This is an amazing book. I love this vintage advertisement from Knoll with the chair sort of. May we send you an illustrated brochure? Oh, and the Tupperware. What a great company. There's also the wonderful ad with Santa Claus sitting in his womb chair. So thanks for joining me for this closer look about 3 different mid-century designs that came out of Cranbrook and our graduates, people who studied and lived here and were manufactured by Knoll. I'll be back next Tuesday for another Live at 5. If you have requests of where I go next, send them my way. If you have questions, you can send them to me. If you're not on Facebook and you would like an emailed link to all of the Facebook Live at 5 tours, that's absolutely something that I can do, and you can see those longer tours as well. Until next time, be well, be safe, be kind to one another. and I will see you next week for another Live at 5. I'm Kevin Adkison, the curator with the Cranbrook Center for Collections and Research.